Good day. Kathy Mortensen here with Our Shared Humanity. And today I'm talking about judgment in the next movement, which is sensitivity. And I'm going to go in more into depth about sensitivity and judgment as seen through the eyes of the parable, the Pharisee and the tax collector. And I'm using this parable for this line of the prayer, hallowed be our name. Because as we hallow both ourselves and our connection to God or that which is sacred in life, we're dependent on sensitivity. This sensitivity to strengthen our ability to live inside paradox. So, as I speak about the parable, I want you to think of where you hold judgment in your body. That was the first um, overview, was just becoming aware of it in your body. And so as you hold that awareness, what are you becoming sensitive to as you hold that awareness? And the reason I've chosen this parable is because I think it looks at judgment and sensitivity through various lenses that we deal with in a daily life. Sensitivity is that aspect of being, of our state of being, when we're being sensitive for both self protection, we need to protect ourselves, as well as being open to what the present moment is giving us. That we're being sensitive to use discernment and humility. That there's a sensitivity to an individual need and a shared belonging. And this movement really trains our nervous system to feel judgment without collapsing into righteousness or shame. So this parable, the Pharisee and the tax collector, it kind of dramatizes this embodiment of how we embody judgment. So this parable is the two men go into a temple to pray. One was a Pharisee, who is a respected religious leader, someone who knows about the religion of the time, a Jewish scholar. The other was a tax collector who's seen as and viewed by the outside world as a traitor and a sinner. The Pharisee stands apart from others in the temple and prays, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like the tax collector. I fast twice a week and give a tenth of all I receive. His prayer was comparison. His identity was defended through judgment. He justified himself by contrasting his righteousness with others. The tax collector, standing at a distance, would not even lift his eyes to heaven. He beat his chest and prayed, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. His prayer expressed and exposed vulnerability before the sacred. He made no comparisons. He offered no justification. He simply stood open and honest in his need. And Jesus said, I tell you, this man, not the other, went home justified before God. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. So this is how the parable dramatizes the embodiment of judgment. The Pharisee judges in order to secure his belonging. He feels secure because he knows the religious law and he's following religious law. He belongs. In coming to the temple and facing religious law, the tax collector feels judged and he remains open to the truth that he has done some wrong. Each person, the Pharisee and the tax collector, are both negotiating their own fear, their own identity, their own safety. And here's where the paradox of sensitivity comes into line. Both the Pharisee and the tax collector are human. Both are longing for dignity. Both reveal how judgment protects our fragile self. The moment of transformation is not moral correction, but being sensitive to one's inner stance, one's inner state of being. The tax collector exposes vulnerability before the mystery of transformation. He stood at a distance. He did not take a socially rightful place. He chose a state of humility rather than entitlement. When you're in that kind of state, when you're in that kind of posture of being humble, that you know you're human and worthy, that you have failures and success. That is a state that sends out this sensitivity that you're not fully in control. You're not presenting yourself as polished. And you're so vulnerable, you're willing to be seen as incomplete. In the story, it says he lowers his eyes, beats his chest. It's like his body acknowledges his limitation. He expresses his distress without having to manage an appearance of being in charge or better than. It sends a message. It communicates. I cannot save myself by image alone. What is happening inside of me is deeper than words. When we're that sensitive, we're embodying a surrender toward the mystery of life. The tax collector appealed to mercy rather than comparison. He didn't measure himself against others. He didn't rely on his credentials as a tax collector, where the Pharisee had his credentials. He didn't rely on moral scorekeeping. He opened himself in sensitivity, the state of being beyond ego and controlling ego. I still have to work at that. My ego still likes to peek out. God be merciful to me, a sinner. Here he's making room for that mystery beyond certainty. You don't know if you'll be forgiven by others that you've harmed. He's just being open to the grace that's there beyond justice. That's a type of belonging that's beyond being worthy. That's being vulnerable before the unknown ground of being. Here he's allowing paradox. His prayer holds both of those truths, that I am flawed and I'm lovable. He doesn't collapse into total shame. He doesn't inflate into righteousness. This place of inner tension, when we can hold it consciously, here's where we birth our transformation. Here's where we stand in the state of vulnerability before this mystery we can't resolve. We can only receive it. He trusts relationship over performance. He doesn't justify himself. He lets himself be justified by something relational, unseen, uncontrollable. This is the core of a vulnerable kinship with life. We can't secure belonging by force. I can only open myself to a belonging that I can't control. That is a mystery. To be sensitive is to feel the wound without defending against its truth. Sensitivity is not collapsing into judgment. It's not performing righteousness, but letting oneself be touched by a bigger reality than our ego. The tax collector stands in uncertainty and remains open. That's how sensitivity becomes a threshold to relational wisdom. You know, the Pharisee defends his identity through comparison. His posture's not just simply pride, it's also a defensive strategy to protect his belonging, to protect his value, to protect his identity. By measuring himself against others, he anchors his identity in how well he performs. Comparison says, I know where I stand because I know where others are, where they stand, and some of them stand beneath me. He sees, and comparison informs him that he's worthy because he's earned it. And he belongs because he's met the conditions of belonging. This keeps judgment external and it avoids vulnerability. You know, comparison suppresses this idea of uncertainty. If identity depends on being better than the other, there is no space for mystery or contingency or limitations. When when the Pharisee says, makes comparisons, what his state of being is communicating, it's saying, I'm safe because I'm not like him, the tax collector. This difference protects me from ambiguity. My certainty shields me from relational risk. I don't have to risk myself to be in relationship with others not like me. The Pharisee is avoiding that internal exposure, the sensitivity in his state of being, by tightening around an egoic clarity. His ego was clarifying for him who he is and what he is. When we compare, it protects old wounds. The Pharisee's superiority hides fragility. Judgment becomes a buffer against shame or unworthiness. Internally, that state of being is whispering, if I stop performing, I might be exposed as insufficient. If I'm equal to others, wow, I could be rejected. This is the fragility of identity. We hold our identity in a relational distance by comparison. Comparison bypasses this mutuality of being human, of sharing our humanity. By setting himself apart, the Pharisee avoids being affected by others. Comparison establishes a hierarchy instead of a reciprocity. It establishes what is certain rather than being curious. Comparison establishes judgment, and the judgment that we all need inhibits this idea of shared humanity rather than the paradoxical judgment of existing in a shared humanity. This certainty of the Pharisee prevents sensitivity from deepening into compassion. The Pharisee cannot at the same time hold goodness and imperfection. He's struggling to hold belonging and limitation. He cannot hold righteousness and humility. His need to compare flattens paradox into opposing ideas. Better and worse, worthy or unworthy. I'm in, you're out. Think about that for a minute. Comparison versus curiosity. Think about how, in our judgment, are we sensitive to how we secure our identity, is who we are through performance and comparison? Or can we define who we are through honesty and surrender? How do we use judgment? Think of the difference in how judgment is used. The Pharisee used judgment to separate himself from others. The tax collector used judgment to feel internally. Hmm. Let's look at the emotional movement. The emotions of the Pharisee were defended. I've followed all the laws. He's defended his emotions. The tax collector exposes his emotions. They're shared. They're allowed to move, not live with uncertainty. They're allowed to become a learning tool. You know, the Pharisee, in my mind, represents how we are when our nervous system is tight or escalated or elevated. The tax collector is using tools and skills to soften and collapse his nervous system with trust, trusting in the mystery. With the Pharisee, belonging is earned. With the tax collector, belonging is received. The tax collector has a high capacity for holding paradox, that he can be human and spiritual or sacred at the same time. The Pharisee has a low capacity to hold paradox. He needed to see himself as spiritual and wasn't open to his weakness. You know, the Pharisee fears ambiguity because when things are ambiguous, it threatens control. So he protects himself through judgment that creates distance. I do that a lot. The tax collector feels judged, yet remains open. He allows uncertainty, trusting something relational beyond performance. He's just being honest. This line of the prayer, hallowed be thy name. When we look at judgment, we're aware of it. We become sensitive to it. Sensitivity and judgment is the moment where judgment can move from protection through vulnerability, from certainty through into curiosity, from performance into being present. The Pharisee resists this movement. The tax collector embodies this movement. The sensitive, being sensitive and learning to become aware and then sensitive helps us grow tolerant of paradox. We all have these instincts within us. So I'm going to leave you this evening. What do you choose to grow? the state of relational wisdom? How do you choose to relate? To widen your capacity to hold paradox? Or to protect yourself and compare? To deepen relational ability? Or to promote your elitism? To unfold into an embracement of compassion? Or praise your achievement? Keep growing your sensitivity, because I am. Namaste.